Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So we're gonna shift gears a little. That was just a brief intro into object-oriented classes with Ruby. We'll kind of, like as we go through this course, we'll kind of see some more examples, especially like when we get to when we go back into Rails, because there's definitely lots of these concepts being applied and we'll start to build on it. So just kind of want to give you your first taste in Ruby. And now let's go to the React side of thing in JavaScript and do a little demo there. This will kind of be more along the lines with what your homework is going to be today. I'm going to just go ahead and go back to my week 5 directory. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a React app. So yarn create React app. And let's just call this like actually, let me see what we're building. I kind of want to look at the homework. Let's just call this like a class component demo. You can call it whatever, but this is what essentially we'll be doing. We're just kind of doing some class components. So let this build. Get CD into class components. Go ahead, open this up into code. And then close these demos. All right. So we have just the React app. Nothing new here. While yours is maybe building, I'm going to just like add some stuff to the README. Class components. I forget the, like, I think prior to React version, I think is like 18 question mark. There were not hooks. Why does this matter? There was a choice that you would have to make between, do I use, so before that, you had to choose, do I make my component functional component or a class component? Now, there were 2 reasons that you had to choose class component if you wanted to do a couple things or features. So I'll just say this features only available class components. And those 2 things are going to be, if you wanted to have state, and if you wanted to, run lifecycle methods. Does anyone know what a lifecycle method is, or what we have seen an example of it with our functional components? Does anyone remember what that is? Like, you want to do something at a certain point in time of your component's life cycle. Does anyone remember? Like when your component loads to the page, what did we do? What might you want to do?
Oh, is that like a on click or like a on
The use effect?
Yeah, it's the use effect.
use effect?
So the use effect allows us to like run something after the component mounts. So, you know, this would be, so we've seen, if we want to have state, we can use the use state hook. Lifecycle methods, you know, we've seen the use effect hook. But yeah, before version 18 of React, there was no such thing as use state. There was no such thing as use effect. So if you wanted to have state in your app, or you wanted to have a lifecycle method, you had to make your component a class component. So this makes so in your career and in like you know, coding examples and Stack Overflows, you know, you're going to run into class components. I'm going to say this. I would say with hooks, functional components are generally preferred. We'll kind of look at why, like, they're just kind of cleaner. They're a little more simplified than class components. But, you know, you might go to a company and they have a big React code base and their class components, and they're not going to go rewrite their code base of all these components because functional components are a little more clean or a little more hip. But also going through this today with class components, hopefully this is it should act as a little bit of a review. And then it's going to strengthen your knowledge of just React, because, you know, we're going to have state. The concept of state remains there, just a little different how we do it. The concept of lifecycle methods is going to be there. It's just going to be different how we do it in a class. Cool. Any questions with this? So I guess let's just go ahead and write some code. So let's just do like a something with state. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to create. Let's do 2 folders. Let's do functional, because I think this will also be good to do them side by side. So I'm going to have a functional folder and I'm going to have a class folder. So we can like write a component as a functional component, and then we can write it again as a class component. Okay. So let's do our basic counter, good old counter. And I'm going to write this as a functional component. So this should just be in Breeze, right? So I can't spell this right. So I'm going to make a function. Why we call this a functional component? Because this is just a JavaScript function, right? And it's going to return let's just do this for now, h1. And then let's export default, this function. And then in my app.js, let's go ahead and get rid of all this. Maybe I can do a border class. Good old lovely border class. You don't have to do this. This will just give us a little bit of space. Margin 10 pixels. 10 pixels. And then border 1 pixel dashed black. Let's do a couple of these to maybe have some different colors. Skip 3 is enough for now. Border is going to be red. And blue. Okay, so, and then just to create some, so you can kind of see these, let's just get this a class name. Because in one of these divs, let's do like H1, let's do my class. We'll do functional, actually, let's do functional. And down here, let's do our class. I'll just slack this out because there's kind of some setup. Let's go ahead and start my server. Okay, so there's my functional and there's that counter component. I could, give this class name border 2. So just create that space. Okay, so let's just go ahead and see. Let's keep it very simple right now and just see how do I do this exact same thing as a class component. So, but before we do that, this is as simple as we can get, right? Just have a counter component that right now is just returning some JSX. It's not doing anything with state or props. It's, blank. Just pretty simple. So in here, let's name this counter as well. Fun with some naming conflicts. So I now want to write a class component. So how do I do classes in JavaScript? Well, I do class. And then the name of the class, this is going to be counter. And in Ruby, we use the arrow sign. In JavaScript, we say extends. Because I'm going to extend React. So now I have to import React in here. So actually need React. React. And now I can do a React dot component. And then I can export default counter. So remember how I showed like with the speak method, we need to define a method. Well, let's just leave this blank for now. So what I'm going to do in my app.js, I'm going to import counter. From my class. Let's go through a couple of these errors here because I'm going to get an error. Counter has already been declared. Any ideas what I can do here? Anyone?
Change the name.
Name something.
I could go in and I could rename the file. Call it like counter class. But actually, I could just go ahead and call this whatever I want. See if that works. Well, now it's breaking in a different way. I don't have that error again. I have a different error. I have this error, no render method found on the component instance. You may have forgotten to define render. So my app's breaking. So I'm extending from React component. So when I extend React component, I must find the render method. Okay, so let's define that render. Now I'm not, since I'm in a class, I'm not going to say const render. I just, that's like invalid JavaScript. I just call the method, I just define the method render.
You wouldn't do let render either.
No, do not, yeah. Because this method render belongs to the class. So, but now I'm getting this error. Your render method should have a return statement. Well, that makes sense, right? I need to return some JSX. And let's just do this class name. And I'm going to throw console.logs inside of here, console.log render method. Let's just do counter render method call. This, you know, I think the logs will kind of help us see the lifecycle methods. Let's go ahead and clear this. I refresh this, the counter render method called, boom, there's my counter. So something with what's going on here, this is just JavaScript importing and exporting. I can name a default, when I import a default export, I can name it anything. Even though like the file's called counter and the class is called counter, I'm exporting default that. So right here, when I import it, I can just rename it right there. Cool. So now I have my counter, I have my two counter components. Now, when you're looking at the app.js, other than this, like, let's just do this counter A, counter B. I'll show you these work, like those names work. Still working. When you're using these components, can you tell if this is defined by a class or if this is defined by a function?
No.
No, you don't really know. You don't. When you're using it, it doesn't matter. You're going to treat them the same. So creating a component as a class or a functional component doesn't change how you use it. It just changes how you define it. So let's go ahead. Let's go back to our functional component and let's do our count. So remember, for this, I need to import use state. from React because I want to have some state. So then I could do like const count, and this set count equals use state. We'll define that initial value to 0. So now I can like say count is count. I can get that state. And then I could have like we'll just do one button where we can like add for now. And then on click, we can do our function, set count plus 1. So remember our use state looks something like this. This is the state. This is the way to set state. And this is the initial state. And let's also do a console.log for return. So if I go and then inspect, let's just refresh. So I refresh, I get both of those like kind of, you know, the before counter function return. So it's like right before it's mounting. And then I have the count render method called. And then when I click add, you know, it's re-rendering that component. So it's logging that log. And then my state's changing and all is good in the universe. Like my app's working. Cool. Now this should be like that's like a basic review of state, right? Any questions on this before we go to the class component? So things you want to like, I think, start getting in your head is when you call, you know, i.e. when you call this set state method, it triggers a re-render, right? Does that sentence make sense?
Like it re-renders the page, is that what you're meaning?
Yeah. You know, it updates state. And I need to put this right here. So when you call this set state, it updates the state method and it triggers the re-render. So anytime you're changing your, like in this count, in this state, it's the count state. Anytime you call this set count function, it's going to update this count state and then it's going to trigger this this component to re-render. So I could almost say this like re-rendering counter function. Or just rendering. So every time I'm changing the state and I'm rendering the counter function, I'm rendering counter. I could, let's maybe just also, let's throw this in a method. Let's just call it add. Let's throw this in a method. So I can do like a console.log about to update state. And then, we can set count to be count plus 1. Let's also do something a little confusing. Okay. I have this, I just threw this in a function so I could like throw a lot of logs inside of here. So I'm about to update count state. I'm going to set count plus 1. So then I'm going to log, hey, count state is updated. And then I'm going to log count. So you would expect count to be whatever count was plus 1, right? Right here. Let's go look at this. So let's refresh. My count starts at 0. I click add. About to update count state, update. Wait, count is 0, but it's 1 in my UI. What? Count is not updated, but it is in the UI. Is that, are you seeing this kind of weird behavior?
Yeah,
So it's update, like it's working, like my count state is 1, but why is it not right here? Well, this is async. This function is kind of async. So you can't assume it will be updated. It will by the time your component this is just something React is doing. Count. So let's refresh. So count is 0 there, but before render, it's going to be updated. It's kind of weird though, right? So this is just something like React is doing this because it's behind the scenes. It's for efficiency. It's like if it makes it async, it can like go in and like check stuff. So the reason why it's doing it is there's like an efficiency reason. So what if I wanted, let's say I had some, like I wanted to call some function. That needs the updated count state. Like I need it right here. So let's do const. Let's call this function do stuff with updated count. This is going to want that updated count. Or just do it like this. You're definitely going to probably run into this at one point or multiple points. Or you have a function, you want to like update your state, but then you want to do something after that's been updated. So let's just run this. Oop, refresh. So count and do stuff with updated count, that's still 0. And React's not, I mean, React is going to update it before it renders, but you need to do something with that updated count. How do you get around this? Do you get what I'm asking? Like, we need to log updated count here. You know, the correct state. But I'm just going to tell you right now, we can't use count because it's not going to be updated, and React's not going to change how their code works because we want to use it here. So how do we get around this?
You just have
Yeah.
to do all that further down on your page.
What?
You have to do all that further down on your page.
No, I need to do it right here. Like I have to do it right here. I can't move it. I can't like try to like happen anywhere else. Because it's not like I can't, because I really can't move it. Like I can't move it outside of this function. I need to do it within the context of this add function.
Can you do it like, oh, wait. This.
Oh, wait's not a bad idea. I can't, it doesn't like, the set count isn't returning a promise though, so I can't do that. That's not a bad idea though. And I wouldn't want to block my code either, because if I did in a way, it would like pause the execution. And it would kind of defeat the purpose of React doing that, like React doing this efficiency thing. But that's like kind of, that's a good idea. Okay. This is more, I think it's going to be like when you see it, it's going to be really simple. So I can set count. What if I just did this? Like I'm setting count to count +1. Why don't I just do something like that? Like I know the value that I want, it's going to be count +1. So, you know, I could store that in a variable, new count equals count +1. Then I could set that, my count to the new count, and then I have that value of the new count that I can pass to the function. So I can create my new count, just throw it in a variable, throw that variable to where I set it to what I want the new thing to be, but then I can throw it to my function as an argument. And then define a parameter here and then use it. So now if I hit refresh, I click add. In that do stuff with updated count, that's getting the 1. And that's how you're going to get around that. So yeah, we just made this counter example a little more complicated, but this, yeah. Actually, I want to throw this up here. Let's call it. Here we pass new count that has the right state or right value to our function. And yeah, we can be assured here, like once we get here, count will be updated. So this is the like thing with coding. It's like you think you have a hang of like a concept like use state, and then you run into like this weird case where you don't get something you expect. And this is an intentional feature of use state because React has it this way so it can be more efficient. But it can make your code look this definitely causes issues because it's 100% understandable that you would think count right here would be updated, but it's not. Cool. All right, so let's do this in our our class component. So I'm going to do this constructor. Oh my gosh, I've like forgotten how to write a constructor in React. Okay, what do you think the constructor is like that we just learned about in Ruby? What any ideas? Like what method is this like similar to or the analogous to?
The controller.
No, it's from what we learned today.
Would it be like initialize?
Yeah, this is just the initialize. In Ruby, it's called initialize. In JavaScript, it's called constructor. We do like console.log. Counter constructor. Let's clear this. I think I have an error somewhere. So must call super constructor in derived class before accessing this. So it wants me to call super. Okay, it wants me to call the super method. And we saw that's the same. So what's this super? What do you think this super is doing? It's calling the constructor in this React component class. Let's clear this. I'm just so we can like see the logs better. I'm going to just comment this functional one out just so we only see the class logs. So we have our counter constructor called, and then we call our render method. Because I'm creating, you could think of this as an instance of my counter class, and then I can create many instances of them. So for each one, I'm going to call the constructor method and then call the render method. Call the constructor. It looks like one of these might have been rendered twice. Oh, I just had an extra log in there. So we call the constructor, call the render. Okay, let's go create the next one, constructor, render, constructor, render. Now we want to have state. Okay. So let's do this dot state. So here's where the this keyword pops up. This is like the self keyword in Ruby. So this refers to this instance of the class. And we're calling it, and we're going to call this for the state, we always call it this dot state. And this is always, oh man, see, I start to say like this keyword so many times. This dot state is always going to be an object. A JavaScript object. See, I have state equals, and then I'm setting it to an object that has a count key and 0. So to access this state, count, I do this dot state. What do I need to do after this? Say object, I need to grab the count. So this is grab this instance, look at the state object, and then grab the count key. Count is 0, 0, 0. All right, so let's now do the add. So let's do button add. So I don't do const, this is on a class, I do add. I'm gonna say this, oh man. Use arrow functions for now. Finds this. That might not make any sense. But especially with event handlers, this is really true, like event handlers use arrow functions. And we'll kind of look at this error. So I'm gonna do a this function called add. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to set state here. I want to set my state. If you're programming this React component, and you wanted to set state, you wanted to have this way to set state, what would you call that method? Set state. So I want to set state here, right? I want to like change the state. I mean, you could change state, set state, but here I want to change the state. So I'm going to call this the set state method. Where is this method coming from? I'm not defining it anywhere. Why is this? I'm telling you, this is going to be defined. Where would this be coming from? Anyone?
My only guess would be props.
It's not the props. It's from extending the component. So
Oh.
that state method is defined in this component. And set state, this function, set state does two things. It updates your state object. And whenever that happens, render is called. So we set our state that updates the state and triggers render. It's very much like the similar thing, you know, in a functional component. We set the state that updates the state, and then it triggers a re-render. We don't have a render function in here, but it, you know, calls this to be returned again. So what I want to do is I want to change count. Well, I want to grab the count. That's going to be this dot state dot count. This one. Let's refresh. It is not updating. Oh, because I don't have a handler on here. On click equals add. Add is not defined. Oh man, why is add not defined? It's right here. Oh, when we got that error with like a functional component, I would say const add. Well, it doesn't like that. Okay. I want to call the add function. Well, I have to call it like so. This dot add. Take this component and call it the add function. Because I just want to call the add function on one of my counters, not all of them. I want to call it on the instance that was clicked. So take that instance, so this, call the add method. And for this instance that it was called on, call the set state method, set the count equal to the instance that clicked it, grab that state count and add 1. And now our counter works. And notice when I click add, my counter my render method's called and my state is updating. Just going to comment this out just to show you an error you might run into. So I'm not going to have this be an arrow function. That's all I changed. I mean, I got rid of the comments, but let's not do this. Like click add, blows up. What is this error saying? Let's look at it exactly. So line 15, can't read properties of undefined reading set state. Line 15, can't read properties of like set state or reading set state of undefined. So what, in that particular instance, what do I know the value of this is for that error?
Undefined.
Yeah, this is undefined. So that is the error. Like, why is it's undefined? And that's a whole nother thing. If I want to define this, I can do this dot add equals this dot bind this dot add. Oh wait, this dot bind this. If I forgot how to do so many thises. This dot bind is not a function. Oh, this dot add dot bind, this is how I do it. All right, so that's how you fix that. This dot add equals this dot add dot bind this. I'm saying, hey, bind this JavaScript of this word keyword is a little definitely confusing. So now I'm binding this to be the instance, the React instance. So you can fix it that way, or you can just use an arrow function. So the arrow function binds this to instance. I don't really like, for now, you don't have to kind of worry about that, like what that means. I would say for your event handlers and just your functions, just use arrow functions. If you ever run into that error where it's saying cannot read property undefined, and you get that line and you see that this error, you go make it an arrow function. Or you bind it up here like that. Cool. Whose mind is just blown, or does seeing a counter component in a different way, like written in a different way, does it? A lot of the functionality is like the concepts are the same. You know, there's an event, you change the state, and then that triggers a re-render. That stuff is the same for both functional and counter components. But we're getting a little more into like the nitty gritty of, you know, maybe some unexpected behaviors of use state. And then also, this is our first time seeing a class component. Let me select this out. I think this is a good time for a break. I'm going to say, like, we're going to, like, for your homework today, you're going to be writing class components. I think for like most of the course, it's fine if you do just stick with functional components. Once like use state and like the use effect stuff starts to sink in, really sink in, it's really not that hard to go back and forth. But I want to go over some class components just because we might be seeing some more examples in like Stack Overflows. And once we start using third-party libraries, we might see them using class components instead of functional components. So you kind of need to know how to like read them. Cool. Let's take a break. Let's come back at 12 o'clock. Any questions? Cool.